"You'll never be more than a janitor in this school," Mrs. Henderson said, her cold blue eyes piercing through me as she held my college application letter in her pale hands. "Girls like you should focus on realistic goals." The words hit me like ice water, freezing every dream I'd ever dared to whisper to myself in the quiet corners of Lincoln High School. Which country are you listening from? Tell us in the comments below. My name is Maya Johnson, and I was 17 years old when those words tried to kill my spirit. Growing up in Cedar Falls, Iowa, I was raised by my grandmother after my parents died in a car accident when I was 8. Grandma Rose worked 3 jobs to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads, cleaning offices at night, serving lunch at the elementary school, and doing laundry for wealthy families on weekends. Our little house on Maple Street wasn't much to look at from the outside. The paint was peeling, the front steps creaked, and the garden was more weeds than flowers. But inside, it was filled with love, the smell of cornbread, and Grandma's voice humming old spirituals while she ironed clothes late into the night. She'd always tell me, "Baby girl, education is the one thing they can't take away from you. You study hard, you hear me? You're gonna be somebody special." I believed her with every fiber of my being. School was my sanctuary. While other kids complained about homework, I devoured every assignment like it was a treasure map leading to my future. I spent hours at the library reading everything from Shakespeare to scientific journals. Math equations made sense to me in a way that the cruelty of the world didn't. When I solved problems, there was always a clear answer, a definitive solution. Life wasn't like that, but academics gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I could solve the puzzle of my circumstances too. By my junior year, I was ranked 3rd in my class of 400 students. I was president of the debate team, captain of the academic bowl, and I tutored younger students after school for free. My teachers seemed proud of me, at least most of them did. They'd nod approvingly when I raised my hand, smile when I turned in assignments early, and several had even written glowing recommendation letters for my college applications. I had big dreams. I wanted to become a pediatrician to help children who looked like me see that they could grow up to be healers, not just patients. I'd already been accepted to 3 universities with partial scholarships, and I was waiting to hear back from Harvard Medical School's early admission program. A dream so big that I barely dared to speak it aloud, even to Grandma Rose. Everything seemed to be falling into place. I was 17, full of hope, and convinced that hard work and determination could overcome any obstacle. I had no idea that the biggest challenge to my dreams wouldn't come from financial hardship or academic struggles. It would come from the person who was supposed to guide and support me through my final year of high school. Mrs. Patricia Henderson was the head guidance counselor at Lincoln High School, a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a wardrobe that screamed suburban privilege. She'd been at the school for over 20 years, and everyone knew she had connections with college admissions officers across the country. Getting on her good side could mean the difference between acceptance and rejection letters. I'd scheduled an appointment with her in early October to discuss my college applications and get her official recommendation for my Harvard application. I walked into her office that Tuesday morning with my portfolio carefully organized, transcripts, test scores, essay drafts, and a list of my extracurricular activities and volunteer work. Her office was immaculate, with motivational posters about reaching for the stars and believing in yourself covering the walls. The irony wasn't lost on me later. She gestured for me to sit in the chair across from her desk, barely looking up from her computer screen. "Maya Johnson," she said, finally lifting her eyes to meet mine. There was something cold in her expression, something I couldn't quite place. "I've been reviewing your file." "Yes, ma'am," I replied, sitting up straighter. "I wanted to discuss my college applications, particularly Harvard's early admission program. I know the deadline is approaching, and I wanted to make sure everything was in order." She leaned back in her chair, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It wasn't a kind smile. "Harvard," she repeated as if the word tasted bitter. "Maya, I think we need to have a realistic conversation about your future." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, pulling out a folder, my folder, and flipping through it slowly, deliberately. "Your grades are certainly adequate and your test scores are respectable. But Maya, you need to understand something about the real world." She leaned forward, clasping her hands together on the desk. "Colleges like Harvard, they have certain expectations. They're looking for students who will fit into their environment, who will represent their institution well. Students who come from appropriate backgrounds." The words hung in the air like poison. I felt my throat tighten, but I tried to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was talking about my family's financial situation. Maybe she was trying to prepare me for the reality of college costs. Mrs. Henderson, I understand that Harvard is expensive, but I've been applying for scholarships and I'm confident that. She held up her hand, cutting me off. It's not just about money, Maya. It's about fit. About belonging. Her eyes traveled over me slowly, taking in my carefully pressed thrift store blouse, my natural hair that I'd spent an hour styling that morning, the color of my skin. I don't understand, I said quietly, though part of me was beginning to understand all too well. Maya, I've been doing this job for over 20 years. I've seen hundreds of students come through these doors with big dreams and unrealistic expectations. And I've learned that it's kinder to be honest with them early on rather than let them set themselves up for disappointment. She pulled out a different set of papers. Applications for community colleges and trade schools. Now, these options would be much more suitable for someone in your situation. There's a wonderful culinary arts program at the community college, and I know they're always looking for reliable young people in the hospitality industry. Or perhaps you might consider the healthcare aid certification program. It's practical, it's stable, and it would allow you to help people in a way that's appropriate for your background. The room started spinning. I gripped the arms of my chair, trying to process what I was hearing. Mrs. Henderson, I've been accepted to 3 universities already. My SAT scores are in the 95th percentile. I've maintained a 4.2 GPA while working part-time and those are all wonderful achievements, she interrupted, her voice taking on a patronizing tone. But Maya, you need to be realistic about what doors are actually going to open for you. I've seen too many students like you get their hopes up, only to struggle and fail when they're in over their heads. Students like me. The phrase echoed in my mind. Students like me. What exactly do you mean by students like me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something ugly flash across her face. Maya, I'm trying to help you understand that success isn't just about grades and test scores. It's about fitting in, about people accepting you. And the truth is, in certain environments, in certain professions, that's going to be challenging for you. She stood up and walked around her desk, perching on the edge right in front of me. You're a bright girl, but you need to understand your place. Your grandmother works as a cleaning lady, doesn't she? There's no shame in honest work. Maybe you should consider following a similar path. Something stable, something where you'll be appreciated for what you can actually contribute. The words hit me like physical blows. I felt tears threatening to spill over, but I blinked them back furiously. I would not cry in front of this woman. I would not give her the satisfaction. But my teachers, I started. Your teachers are being kind, she said firmly. They don't want to hurt your feelings. But I'm the one who has to submit the official recommendation to Harvard, and I cannot, in good conscience, recommend a student who I believe will struggle to succeed in that environment. She walked back to her desk and picked up my Harvard application, holding it in front of me. You'll never be more than a janitor in this school, she said, her voice cold and final. Girls like you should focus on realistic goals. And then she tore the application in half. The sound of ripping paper was like thunder in the small office. I watched the pieces of my dream flutter to the floor and something inside me broke. But something else, something deeper and stronger, began to burn. I stood up slowly, my legs shaking. Mrs. Henderson, I said, my voice steadier than I felt, I need copies of all my transcripts and test scores sent directly to Harvard. I'll be submitting my application online. She laughed, actually laughed. Maya, even if you somehow manage to get accepted, which you won't, how exactly do you think you'll pay for it? Your grandmother can barely keep the lights on. I looked her straight in the eye. That's not your concern, I said quietly. And Mrs. Henderson? You're wrong about me. You're wrong about girls like me. And someday I'm going to prove it. I turned and walked out of her office, leaving the torn pieces of my application scattered on her floor like fallen dreams. But in my heart, those dreams were still very much alive. The weeks following that meeting with Mrs. Henderson were some of the darkest of my life. Word spread quickly through the school's administrative network that I was a difficult student with unrealistic expectations. Suddenly, teachers who had once praised my work became distant and cool. My requests for additional recommendation letters were met with excuses and delays. Mrs. Henderson seemed to take particular pleasure in reminding me of my place, whenever our paths crossed. She'd make comments in faculty meetings about students who needed to learn to accept their limitations, loud enough for me to hear when I was in the hallway. She assigned me to cleanup duty during school events, making sure I was wearing the bright yellow maintenance volunteer vest when prospective college recruiters visited. The psychological warfare was relentless and subtle. She'd schedule me for mandatory career counseling sessions during my study periods, where she'd present me with brochures for vocational schools and entry-level job training programs. She'd make comments about how some students needed to think practically about their futures, in front of my classmates. The worst part was watching how her attitude influenced others. Teachers who had once encouraged me began suggesting I keep my options open and consider backup plans. My debate team coach, who had written one of my recommendation letters, suddenly became unavailable when I needed to discuss my college applications. Even some of my classmates began treating me differently, as if Mrs. Henderson's assessment of my potential was somehow contagious. But Grandma Rose saw what was happening to me. She watched me come home each day a little more defeated, a little more withdrawn. My grades remained perfect, but the light in my eyes was dimming. "Baby girl," she said one evening as we sat at our small kitchen table, "you've been carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders lately. What's troubling you?" I told her everything. About Mrs. Henderson's words, about the torn application, about how everyone at school was treating me like I was fooling myself with impossible dreams. Grandma Rose listened without interrupting, her weathered hands folded in her lap, her dark eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached across the table and took my hands in hers. "Maya," she said, her voice soft but firm, "let me tell you something about people like Mrs. Henderson. They're scared." "Scared of what, Grandma?" "Scared of people like you. Scared of what happens when someone they've decided is less than turns out to be extraordinary. Scared of their own mediocrity being exposed." She squeezed my hands tighter. "That woman looked at you and saw everything she's not, young, brilliant, determined, and blessed with a spirit that can't be broken. So she tried to break it." Grandma Rose stood up and walked to the old wooden cabinet in our living room. She pulled out a manila envelope I'd never seen before and brought it back to the table. "Your mama, God rest her soul, she faced the same kind of hatred when she was your age," she said, opening the envelope. Inside were photographs, newspaper clippings, and official documents. She was the first black student to integrate Cedar Falls High School back in 1985. People said terrible things to her, about her, tried to make her feel like she didn't belong. She showed me a newspaper photo of my mother as a teenager, walking up the steps of the high school with her head held high, surrounded by angry faces and protest signs. She looked exactly like me. But your mama, she had something those people couldn't understand and couldn't take away. She had a purpose. She knew she wasn't just fighting for herself, she was fighting for every little black girl who would come after her, including you." Grandma Rose pulled out a certificate, my mother's acceptance letter to medical school. She became a doctor, a baby girl. She saved lives. She proved every single one of those hateful people wrong. Tears were streaming down my face as I looked at my mother's achievements, her courage, her legacy that I was only now beginning to understand. "Mrs. Henderson thinks she can decide your future based on the color of your skin," Grandma Rose continued. "But she's forgotten something important. She's forgotten that we come from a long line of people who refused to let anybody tell them what they couldn't do." That night, I sat at my desk and rewrote my Harvard application from scratch. I wrote about my mother's courage, my grandmother's sacrifice, and my own determination to honor their legacy. I wrote about how diversity in medicine could save lives, how representation mattered, how I wanted to be the doctor for little black girls who needed to see that their dreams were possible. I submitted my application at 11:59 p.m., 1 minute before the deadline. But the battle was far from over. Mrs. Henderson had made it clear that she would not be submitting a positive recommendation, and her influence extended far beyond just Harvard. She began scheduling intervention meetings with my other college choices, sending what she called realistic assessments of my potential to admissions officers. I felt like I was fighting an entire system designed to keep me in my place. Every day was a struggle to maintain my grades while dealing with the constant psychological pressure. Some days I questioned whether she might be right. Maybe I was reaching too high. Maybe I should accept a more realistic path. But then I'd remember my mother's face in that newspaper photo, walking toward her future with dignity and determination despite the hatred surrounding her. I'd remember Grandma Rose working 3 jobs without complaint, always believing in something better. And I'd remember the little girl I used to tutor after school, who told me she wanted to be a doctor just like Miss Maya. I couldn't give up. Too many people were counting on me, including people I'd never met, future generations of black girls who needed to see that the door could be opened, that barriers could be broken, that dreams could become reality. The fight was bigger than just me. It was about proving that potential exists everywhere, in every neighborhood, in every family, regardless of zip code or skin color. It was about showing that excellence has no racial boundaries, that intelligence and determination can flourish anywhere they're given the chance to grow. So I kept studying. I kept applying. I kept believing. And I waited. March 15th started like any other day. I woke up early, helped Grandma Rose prepare breakfast, and reviewed my calculus notes before school. It had been 5 months since I'd submitted my Harvard application, and I'd heard nothing. Mrs. Henderson made sure to remind me regularly that no news was bad news, and that I should start getting excited about community college. I'd learned to block out her comments, but they still stung. My other college acceptances were solid. I had full scholarships to 2 excellent state universities, but Harvard remained the symbol of everything Mrs. Henderson said I couldn't achieve. I was sitting in advanced chemistry when Mrs. Peterson, the school secretary, knocked on the classroom door. "Maya Johnson," she called out, "please report to the main office immediately." My stomach dropped. Being called to the office in the middle of class was never good news. I packed up my books slowly, ignoring the curious stares of my classmates, and made the long walk down the familiar hallway. But when I arrived at the main office, something was different. Mrs. Peterson was practically glowing, and there were several people in expensive suits standing near the reception desk. One of them, a distinguished-looking black woman in her 40s, stepped forward when she saw me. "Maya Johnson?" she asked, extending her hand. "I'm Dr. Angela Washington from Harvard Medical School." My heart stopped. Literally stopped. I stood there, frozen, unable to process what was happening. "I'm sorry to interrupt your school day," Dr. Washington continued, "but I wanted to deliver some news in person. Maya, congratulations. You've been accepted to Harvard University with a full academic scholarship, and you've been pre-selected for our accelerated medical program." The words hit me like a tidal wave. Accepted. Harvard. Full scholarship. Pre-selected for medical school. I felt my knees wobble, and Dr. Washington steadied me with a gentle hand on my arm. "There's more," she said, smiling. "Your application essay was so compelling that it's been selected as the featured story for our Diversity and Excellence recruitment campaign. Your words about honoring your mother's legacy and your commitment to serving underrepresented communities, Maya, it moved our entire admissions committee to tears." I looked around the office trying to ground myself in reality. Mrs. Peterson was beaming like a proud mother. The other suited individuals turned out to be representatives from the local newspaper and a photographer from the university. "We'd like to do a small celebration here at your school," Dr. Washington explained, "and then have you visit Harvard next month to meet with the dean and some of the faculty. Maya, you're exactly the kind of student Harvard was founded to serve, brilliant, determined, and committed to making a difference in the world." That's when I saw her. Mrs. Henderson was standing in the doorway of her office, her face pale as snow, her mouth slightly open in shock. She'd clearly heard every word. Dr. Washington followed my gaze. "Ah, you must be the guidance counselor. I'd like to thank you for your support of Maya throughout this process. Students like her need advocates who believe in their potential." Mrs. Henderson's face went through a series of expressions: shock, embarrassment, and something that looked almost like fear. Yes, of course we're all very proud of Maya's achievement. I'm particularly impressed," Dr. Washington continued, "that Maya was able to excel despite what I understand were some significant challenges. Her essay mentioned facing discouragement from adults who underestimated her potential. I'm glad she had enough supportive educators to counterbalance any negativity." The irony was perfect. Mrs. Henderson was being praised for supporting the very student she tried to destroy. She mumbled something about always believing in Maya's potential and quickly retreated to her office. But the day's surprises weren't over. An hour later, as I was sitting in the main office answering questions from the newspaper reporter, another visitor arrived. This time it was Mr. David Chin, the superintendent of our school district, along with 2 school board members. "Maya," Mr. Chin said, shaking my hand enthusiastically, "when we heard about your Harvard acceptance, we knew we had to be here to congratulate you in person. This is exactly the kind of success story our district is proud to celebrate." He turned to address the small crowd that had gathered. "Maya Johnson represents the very best of what education can achieve. Her success is a testament to the excellence of our academic programs and the dedication of our faculty." I saw Mrs. Henderson peeking out of her office, looking increasingly uncomfortable as more attention was focused on my achievement, the same achievement she'd once called impossible. But the real turning point came when Dr. Washington asked to speak with me privately. We stepped into an empty classroom and she sat down across from me with a serious expression. "Maya," she said, "I want you to know that your acceptance to Harvard isn't charity. It's not about filling a quota or checking a diversity box. You earn this through merit, through excellence, through being exactly the kind of brilliant young mind we're looking for. She paused, studying my face. I also want you to know that we're aware of some of the challenges you faced during the application process. When we didn't receive an official recommendation from your guidance counselor, we did some investigating. My heart started racing. Had Mrs. Henderson's sabotage worked after all? We discovered that several of your teachers had submitted informal recommendations directly to us, bypassing the normal channels. They were concerned that their official recommendations weren't being forwarded to colleges. We also received a very interesting phone call from your grandmother. My grandmother called Harvard? I asked, stunned. Dr. Washington smiled. She did. She called the admissions office directly and asked to speak to someone about her granddaughter's application. She spent an hour on the phone with one of our recruiters, telling them about your character, your work ethic, and your potential. She also mentioned some concerns about the guidance you were receiving at school. My eyes filled with tears. Grandma Rose had been fighting for me behind the scenes, advocating for me when I didn't even know I needed an advocate. Maya, Dr. Washington continued, excellence recognizes excellence. Your teachers knew you deserved better support than you were receiving. Your grandmother knew you belonged at Harvard even when others tried to convince you otherwise. And we know it too. She stood up and handed me an official folder. This contains all your acceptance materials, including information about your scholarship and the pre-med program. But Maya, I want you to remember something. You didn't get into Harvard despite being a black girl from a working-class family. You got into Harvard because you're brilliant, determined, and exactly what the world needs more of. As I walked back to class, clutching my Harvard acceptance folder, I felt like I was floating. The hallways looked the same, but everything had changed. Students I barely knew were congratulating me. Teachers were smiling and nodding approvingly. The impossible had become reality. But the sweetest moment came at the end of the day when I was packing up my locker. Mrs. Henderson approached me, her usual confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before, humility, maybe even shame. Maya, she said quietly, I wanted to congratulate you on your acceptance. I turned to face her, this woman who had tried so hard to convince me I wasn't good enough, smart enough, worthy enough. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. She fidgeted with her papers, clearly struggling with what to say next. I hope you'll be very successful at Harvard. I looked at her for a long moment, this person who had torn up my dreams and told me to accept my limitations. I thought about responding with anger, with the hurt she'd caused me, with all the nights I'd cried because of her words. Instead I smiled. Mrs. Henderson, I want you to know something. When I'm a doctor, when I'm saving lives and breaking barriers, I'll remember this moment. I'll remember that someone told me I'd never amount to anything because of my skin color, and I proved them wrong. Her face flushed red, but I wasn't finished. And when I meet little black girls who dream of becoming doctors, I'll tell them what you taught me, that their potential isn't determined by other people's prejudices. That excellence can come from anywhere. That sometimes the people who try to limit you are just showing you exactly how high you need to rise. I closed my locker and shouldered my backpack. Thank you, Mrs. Henderson. You helped make me stronger than I ever knew I could be. And with that, I walked away, leaving her standing in the empty hallway with the weight of her own limitations. Graduation day arrived on a perfect June morning, with clear blue skies and the promise of new beginnings hanging in the air like the sweet scent of the roses in Grandma Rose's garden. As I stood in the bathroom mirror, adjusting my cap and gown, I could hardly believe how much had changed since that devastating October day in Mrs. Henderson's office. The girl staring back at me was the same Maya Johnson who had walked into that guidance meeting with hopes and dreams, but she was also completely transformed. The uncertainty was gone, replaced by quiet confidence. The fear had been burned away by determination. The doubt had been conquered by proof. You ready, baby girl? Grandma Rose called from the kitchen. She'd taken the day off from all three of her jobs, something she'd never done before, because, as she put it, my granddaughter is graduating as valedictorian and Harvard-bound. The whole world can wait. I walked into the kitchen to find her dressed in her finest church dress, a navy blue ensemble she'd been saving for special occasions. Her eyes were already misty with pride, and she had her old camera ready to capture every moment. Grandma, I said, hugging her tight, I couldn't have done this without you. Yes, you could have, she replied firmly. You had everything you needed right here, she touched my chest, and right here, she touched my forehead. I just made sure nobody convinced you otherwise. The drive to school was quiet, both of us lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled into the parking lot, I saw other families gathering, Parents with expensive cameras, siblings in their Sunday best, grandparents clutching programs and tissues. For a moment, I felt a pang of sadness thinking about my parents, wishing they could be here to see this day. But then I looked at Grandma Rose, who had been mother and father and cheerleader and advocate all rolled into one, and I knew they were here. They were in every sacrifice she'd made, every late night she'd worked to keep me in school, every word of encouragement she'd offered when the world tried to tear me down. The gymnasium was packed with families, faculty, and school board members. As valedictorian, I would be speaking after the superintendent and before the presentation of diplomas. I'd spent weeks crafting my speech, but it wasn't until I saw Mrs. Henderson sitting with the other faculty members that I knew exactly what I needed to say. Superintendent Chen introduced me with glowing praise about my academic achievements, my Harvard acceptance, and my representation of the district's commitment to excellence. As I walked to the podium, the applause was thunderous. I could see Grandma Rose in the third row, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue, beaming with pride. I looked out at the sea of faces, my classmates who would be going on to their own bright futures, the families who had supported them, the teachers who had believed in us. And yes, Mrs. Henderson, sitting stiffly in her chair, avoiding eye contact. "Good morning, family, friends, faculty, and fellow graduates," I began, my voice clear and strong. 8 months ago, someone told me I would never amount to anything because of the color of my skin. Today, I stand before you as your valedictorian, Harvard-bound, with a full scholarship and acceptance to medical school. The audience stirred, sensing that this wasn't going to be a typical graduation speech. I could see Mrs. Henderson shift uncomfortably in her seat. I'm not sharing this to embarrass anyone or to dwell on negativity on this beautiful day. I'm sharing it because I want every person in this room, every graduate, every parent, every little brother or sister watching, to understand something vital about the power of believing in yourself when others don't. I paused, making eye contact with as many people as possible. Excellence doesn't have a color. Intelligence doesn't have a zip code. Potential doesn't depend on your last name or your family's bank account. Dreams don't require permission from people who can't see your vision. The applause started softly and grew louder. I could see parents nodding, students sitting up straighter, teachers smiling with recognition. Today, 37 of my classmates are graduating with honors. We're going to state universities, community colleges, trade schools, the military, and yes, Ivy League institutions. Each path is valuable. Each dream is worthy. Each future is bright because each of you has something unique to contribute to this world. I looked directly at Mrs. Henderson now, and for the first time in months, she met my eyes. To the adults in this room, parents, teachers, counselors, community leaders, you hold incredible power. Your words can lift up or tear down. Your belief can open doors or slam them shut. Your encouragement can fuel dreams or destroy them. Use that power wisely. Use it to build bridges, not walls. The gymnasium was completely silent now, hanging on every word. Some of you may face people who try to limit your potential based on what they see on the outside rather than who you are on the inside. When that happens, and it will happen, remember this moment. Remember that your worth isn't determined by someone else's prejudices. Your future isn't limited by someone else's fears. Your dreams don't require validation from people who lack vision. I smiled, thinking of my mother's courage, my grandmother's strength, and my own journey from that broken moment in October to this triumphant moment in June. Class of 2025, we are graduating into a world that desperately needs what we have to offer. Our diversity is our strength. Our different perspectives are our power. Our varied experiences are our gift to a society that benefits when everyone has the chance to contribute their best. The applause was building again, but I held up my hand because I wasn't finished. And to anyone who has ever been told they're not good enough, smart enough, or worthy enough, to anyone who has had their dreams dismissed or their potential questioned, I want you to know that the person who tried to limit me did me the greatest favor of my life. They showed me exactly how strong I was. They proved that my dreams were bigger than their fears. They demonstrated that my potential was unlimited even when their vision was not. I looked out at Grandma Rose, who was openly crying now, her hand pressed to her heart. In conclusion, I want to leave you with this. Don't let anyone else's limitations become your own. Don't accept someone else's definition of what's possible for your life. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you're not enough, because you are everything you need to be. I paused for the final moment. They said I'd never amount to anything because of my skin color. Today I say that my skin color is beautiful, my heritage is powerful, and my future is unlimited. Class of 2025, let's go show the world what we're made of. The standing ovation lasted for nearly 5 minutes. Students were cheering, parents were crying, and even some of the faculty members were wiping away tears. I could see Mrs. Henderson sitting rigidly in her chair, her face pale, while colleagues around her rose to their feet in applause. As I walked back to my seat, I felt like I was floating. The scared, hurt girl who had left Mrs. Henderson's office in October was gone, replaced by a young woman who knew her worth, understood her power, and was ready to change the world. After the ceremony, as families gathered for photos and celebrations, Mrs. Henderson approached me one final time. She looked older somehow, diminished by the weight of her own prejudices. "Maya," she said quietly away from the crowd, "your speech was very powerful." "Thank you," I replied simply. She struggled for words, clearly battling with something inside herself. "I want you to know that I hope you succeed at Harvard. I hope you become an excellent doctor." I studied her face, this woman who had tried so hard to break my spirit, and I felt something unexpected: pity. She would go on being the same person, limiting other students, missing the potential that walked through her office every day. But I would go on to become everything she said was impossible. "Mrs. Henderson," I said gently, "I hope you learn to see potential in places you've never looked before. I hope you learn to build dreams instead of destroying them. And I hope that someday when another young black girl sits in your office with big dreams, you remember this conversation." She nodded silently and walked away, and I knew it was the last time our paths would cross. Later that evening, as Grandma Rose and I sat on our front porch watching the sunset, she handed me a small wrapped box. "This was your mama's," she said as I opened it. Inside was a delicate gold necklace with a small pendant, a stethoscope. She wore it through medical school. Said it reminded her why she was fighting so hard. As she fastened it around my neck, Grandma Rose whispered, "Your mama would be so proud of the woman you've become. Not just because of Harvard or your grades, but because of how you handled yourself with grace even when others showed you none." I touched the stethoscope pendant, feeling the weight of legacy and possibility. In 3 months, I would be walking across Harvard Yard, beginning the journey toward becoming Dr. Maya Johnson. But tonight I was just a girl who had learned that the most powerful response to hatred is success, that the best revenge against prejudice is excellence, and that sometimes the people who try to limit you end up showing you just how limitless you really are. As I write this story today, 15 years after that graduation day, I'm sitting in my office at Boston Children's Hospital. The walls are covered with diplomas, Harvard undergraduate, Harvard Medical School, pediatric surgery residency certificates, and photos of the hundreds of children I've been privileged to treat. But the most treasured item on my desk is a small framed photo of Grandma Rose from my graduation day, her face radiant with pride and love. Dr. Maya Johnson, that title still gives me chills sometimes. Not because of the prestige but because of what it represents. Every time a little black girl comes into my office and sees a doctor who looks like her, every time a young patient tells me they want to be a surgeon when they grow up, every time I lecture at medical schools about the importance of diversity in medicine, I remember that scared 17-year-old girl who was told she'd never amount to anything. Mrs. Henderson was wrong about so many things, but she was accidentally right about one. I did end up working in schools. Just not as a janitor. I now serve on the board of directors for 3 educational foundations, working to ensure that guidance counselors receive training on unconscious bias and that every student, regardless of their background, receives the support they deserve to pursue their dreams. Last year, I established the Rose Johnson Scholarship Fund at Lincoln High School, named after my grandmother, specifically for first-generation college students from underrepresented communities who plan to pursue careers in medicine. The scholarship includes not just financial support, but mentorship, advocacy, and most importantly, someone who believes in their potential even when others don't. I've learned that people like Mrs. Henderson aren't necessarily evil. They're often just limited by their own experiences and prejudices. They see the world through a narrow lens and assume that their limitations are universal truths. The tragedy isn't that they underestimate others. It's that they underestimate what's possible when we lift each other up instead of tearing each other down. But here's what I want every person reading this to understand. Your potential is not determined by someone else's prejudices. Your worth is not defined by someone else's limitations. Your dreams do not require permission from people who can't see your vision. The world will try to put you in boxes. People will make assumptions about what you can and cannot achieve based on your race, your gender, your family background, your zip code, your accent, your appearance. Some of those people will have power over your opportunities, your applications, your access to resources. It will hurt. It will make you question yourself. It will feel impossible some days. But remember this. Every barrier that's ever been broken was broken by someone who was told it couldn't be done. Every ceiling that's ever been shattered was shattered by someone who refused to accept that it was too high. Every impossible dream that became reality started with someone who decided that other people's limitations wouldn't become their own. When someone tells you that you're not good enough, use it as fuel to become better than they ever imagined. When someone says you don't belong, prove that you not only belong but that the space is better because you're in it. When someone tries to dim your light, shine brighter than they thought possible. And remember, you are not alone in this fight. For every Mrs. Henderson who tries to tear you down, there are teachers who see your potential, grandmothers who sacrifice for your future, mentors who open doors, allies who amplify your voice, and countless others who are cheering for your success even when you don't know they exist. The little girl I tutor now is named Zara. She's 8 years old, lives with her single mother in the same neighborhood where I grew up, and dreams of becoming a pediatric surgeon just like Dr. Maya. When she comes to my office for mentoring sessions, she sits in the same chair where young patients usually sit, and she tells me about her day, her dreams, her fears. Last week, she told me that her teacher said she was very smart for a girl like her. I saw the confusion in her eyes, the same confusion I felt all those years ago when Mrs. Henderson first began her campaign to limit my dreams. But this time the story was different. This time, there was someone there to immediately counteract the poison, to build up instead of tear down, to plant seeds of possibility instead of doubt. Zara, I told her, you're not smart for a girl like you. You're just smart, period. And being smart is just the beginning. Add your kindness, your curiosity, your determination, and your unique perspective to that intelligence, and there's nothing you can't accomplish. Her face lit up with understanding and possibility. Just like you did, Dr. Maya? Just like you're going to do, Dr. Zara? This is how we change the world. One conversation at a time, one dream at a time, one barrier broken at a time. We succeed not just for ourselves but for every person who comes after us, every child who needs to see that their dreams are possible, every future leader who needs to know that excellence has no limitations. They said I'd never amount to anything because of my skin color. Today I save lives, train future doctors, and inspire young people to pursue their biggest dreams. My skin color isn't a limitation, it's part of what makes me uniquely qualified to serve patients who need advocates, to mentor students who need role models, and to break barriers that need breaking. To every person who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told their dreams were too big, your time is coming. Your moment is waiting. Your success is not just possible, it's inevitable as long as you refuse to let anyone else's fears become your own. They judged me by my skin. I showed them the strength of my soul. And in the end, that made all the difference. The little girl who was once told she'd never amount to anything grew up to save lives, change hearts, and prove that potential has no color, no zip code, and no limits, except the ones we accept for ourselves. Dream bigger. Fight harder. Rise higher. The world is waiting for what only you can contribute. This is Maya Johnson, MD, reminding you that your dreams are valid, your potential is unlimited, and your time is now.